All right, good morning, folks. Welcome to our third AUSA Coffee Series. Thank you for being here. For our distinguished guest today, the Undersecretary of the Army, the Honorable Gabe Camarillo. My name is Alex Brody. I am the Director of Meetings for the Association of the United States Army, and I'll apologize up front for all the emails I send you. Oftentimes when I meet a number of our great customers, they say, oh, you're Alex Brody. You're the one who sends me all the emails. So I apologize. We have a great group, as you can see here today, for our distinguished speaker. And so before I introduce General Haley, I do want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors today, Leonardo DRS and Northrop Grumman. We can't thank you enough for your support of AUSA over the years. We can't do these events without our great industry partners. So please give Northrop Grumman and Leonardo DRS a big round of applause. If you're interested in learning more about our sponsorship program, please speak with Gay Hudson or Emily Call. They're out in our registration area, and they'll be around after the event. I'd also like to take a brief moment to recognize our distinguished guests who are here with us this morning. We appreciate the presence of our general officers and command sergeants major joining us this morning as well. It's always a great honor to have you here and participating with us in this event. I'd also like to acknowledge our congressional staff that are here on this special day. Your efforts on behalf of the Army, soldiers, and families is very greatly appreciated. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our Vice President of Membership and Meetings for the Association of the United States Army. Please put your hands together for General Jack Haley.
Yeah, that's okay. You're not here for me, but good morning and welcome. The Honorable Gabe Camarillo was confirmed by the United States Senate on February 3rd, 2022, and was sworn in as the 35th Undersecretary of the Army on February 8th, 2022. So a quick 6 months. As the Undersecretary of the Army, he is the Secretary of the Army's Senior Civilian Assistant and Principal Advisor on matters related to the management and operation of the Army. He is also the Chief Management Officer of the Army. The way I like to look at it is where the Secretary and the Chief and the SMA lead the Army, the Vice and the Under run the Army. Mr. Camarillo previously served as Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, Manpower and Reserve Affairs, where he was responsible for military and civilian personnel and reserve component matters for the Air Force. And we're happy to have you back with the U.S. Army. Yes. And he has also served as a Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, helping to lead and supervise Army modernization programs, procurement, logistics, and R&D investment. So we are very excited to have what is certain to be an informative conversation this morning. So please join me in a warm welcome to the 35th Undersecretary of the Army, Mr. Gabe Camarillo. So let's dive right in.
Let's do it.
Thanks for taking some of your very valuable time with us this morning. I have a few questions along the lines of two of the Chief of Staff for the Army's priorities, people and modernization, and then I'll open it up to the audience for their questions. And Alex will be roaming the audience with a microphone. So there's been a lot in the press about recruiting challenges. We had General Funk, the TRADOC commander, here about a month ago, and he was very candid about the situation the Army faces. What changes is the Army making to improve recruiting and retention? I mean, how is the Army going to attract the talent it needs, and how will it work to retain these soldiers and families?
Well, that's a big question, Jack. I want to first start by thanking AUSA for hosting this event and for allowing me the opportunity to meet with everybody. I do, first of all, want to say that I remember as recently as 2 years ago, sitting as part of the industrial base on the other side of the room and listening to Army leaders discuss the very difficult challenges that they faced. The format was a little bit different. I think we had tables and chairs and we had some breakfast. I like this new one where you've got first class and coach. So this works. But all kidding aside, really do enjoy the opportunity to talk with all of you and hear your questions. So thank you all for being here. So now to your question. So obviously, this was the story that came out yesterday in the HASC Readiness Subcommittee hearing with my battle buddy, General Martin, as the vice. There's no question. You know, we've been talking about it for several months that the Army and really all of the Department of Defense has an unprecedented set of challenges right now in terms of its recruiting environment. And this is not unique to the Army. I think we're all experiencing it. The difficulty is the Army has the largest set of numbers that it has to achieve. So we are the ones that experience those challenges a little bit more acutely, I think, than the other services. The reasons for it, I think, are very diverse. We have some near-term conditions that we're experiencing, everything from the tight labor market coming out of the pandemic to the fact that our recruiters haven't really been in high schools for about 2 years as we have worked our way through COVID. There have been resulting impacts to our youth population, everything from their ability to meet academic standards to physical fitness standards that we've seen some differences. And then there's some longer term issues that we're dealing with. And I think many of my predecessors in this seat have always talked about it. An ongoing multi-year declining trend in propensity of our youth to serve in any military service. The connection we've always talked about between our young population and American families and those who are connected with any of the services in the Department of Defense. That percentage of the population continues to decline. And that's an ongoing trend from nearly 50 years of the all-volunteer force. And we're all really concerned about it. I will say that this has got the top attention from all Army leadership right now. As we discussed yesterday, we continue to look at the projections on what we think end strength will end at FY23. And it was important for us to be very transparent and to give a revised assessment that we think we're going to end at FY23, the close of 23, at anywhere between the range of 445 to 452,000 active duty end strength. And that's over time, taking into account our ability to retain soldiers and our ability to assess new ones. So what are we doing about it? And again, I think there is a near-term and there is a long-term approach that we're currently taking. On the near-term side, we've been really doing everything we possibly can to make sure that we maximize our ability to meet accessions missions in 22 going into 23. That includes, for example, extending some of our best recruiters across the Army to make sure that they have the expertise, they can continue to do the great work. We're making sure that we're funding things like quick ship bonuses and key enlistment bonuses for critical MOSs across the Army to make sure that we're able to attract our eligible, talented population to those critical fields. And we're also looking at experimentation, everything from what we've discussed as a pilot experiment regarding our ability to bring in potential soldiers who are maybe on the cusp of meeting academic and physical standards. What can we do to help prepare them to meet those standards? And the reason we think that experimentation is so important is because we do not believe in sacrificing quality for quantity. And that is why we have taken the steps that we've taken and making sure that we are maintaining the high standards that we require to serve in the Army. Long term, I think there's a lot we need to do to kind of build that propensity that we've talked about. I think we've got to look at ongoing recruiting and marketing and branding of the Army. We've got to find different ways to connect to our youth population. Generation Z is very, very different from every other one before. I have 2 of them as my own kids, so I have direct experience with that. And then we also need to look at where our recruiters are placed. How do we incentivize recruiters to meet the goals of what the all-volunteer force will require in the future? We're looking at absolutely everything. We're working across the department, and we're looking at very creative ways to continue to tackle this problem. It's very difficult also to project what the future will hold. All we can do is give everyone our best assessment based on where we stand today.
Yeah, very, very difficult challenges ahead. And as we discussed earlier, wherever AUSA can help the Army in terms of recruiting, we're across the globe really will help.
And we do need everyone's help. I just want to pounce on that if I could. I mean, obviously, it is an all-volunteer force. So it is a top issue for the country. And I think, again, looking at it as a multi-year issue of declining propensity to serve, we all need to do everything we possibly can, the Army included, to help bridge that gap between our population that maybe doesn't have any connection to military service and what we do. And we're going to be looking at better ways to outreach.
Right. Okay, great. There may be some follow-ups on that.
Of course.
What is the Army doing to address the underlying factors contributing to harmful behaviors? So such as suicide, sexual harassment, sexual assault. We often hear more about the failures to reducing harmful behaviors, but where have there been successes and what more should be done?
Well, this remains all of our top priority, as it should. Every leader in the Department of Defense, and certainly from Secretary Wormuth and General McConville to all of us down, it is our top priority to make sure that we reduce and eliminate harmful behaviors, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and that we create the positive command climates that enable that. I think we've done a lot over many years in the department and certainly in the Army. I think where we have begun to shift our focus in this last year has been more on the prevention side as opposed to just focusing on the response side. And so to that end, I think there's a couple of things that we're looking at. First and foremost, it's implementing across the department the Secretary of Defense's Independent Review Commission findings and recommendations. And key among them, for example, is the development of a prevention workforce. And these are professionals that will be hired across the Department of Defense at all installations to make sure that they serve almost as integrators to be able to assess that environment and to be able to tailor for commanders a best tailored approaches to be able to prevent and mitigate some of those behaviors from happening. In addition, there's a lot of experimentation happening across the Army right now. I just came back from Fort Hood last week. We visited the People First Center, which was a really novel way of providing sharp training that isn't by your typical PowerPoint slides where you normally have to sit through and everyone kind of goes on mental screensaver mode. The idea was to create really immersive training scenarios where people could see and act out scenarios that are very common that happen for our young soldiers, whether it involves potential risk or ideations of suicide, or it involves any kind of harassment, bullying, all the way up to sexual assault. And this really provides a vivid contrast of what soldiers are, what is permitted and what is not permitted. And I think it helps people contextualize it a lot better. It's gotten rave reviews at Fort Hood, and I was really impressed when I saw it. So, our approach moving forward is working as an enterprise to do the things that we think will make a fundamental difference across the Army, but also taking the best ideas we can from the field and seeing where we can scale those out to perhaps give us even more tools to be able to prevent these kind of harmful behaviors. But it remains our top focus, and it always should be. We're not done, and I think we have a long ways to go, but we are taking some positive steps in the right direction.
Yeah, thanks. Switching now to the modernization bucket. Last April, the Secretary of the Army signed a directive redefining the relationship between Army Futures Command and ASALT in Army modernization. Can you describe the basis for that change and clarify what's different now? And then the follow-on is, what are the Army's plans to nominate a new commander for Army Futures Command?
Great question. So I want to begin by saying that the establishment of Army Futures Command in 2018 was a really significant, important step in getting renewed focus and emphasis on developing Army operating concepts, on pursuing experimentation with technology and capabilities and different force models, and then, of course, developing requirements for weapon systems, which that was the focus of what AFC was established in 2018 to do. And that's fantastic. It is an enduring need. I think we need to continue to maintain emphasis on that. And then the creation of AFC, it's came from a variety of dozens of documents. Everything from directives and general orders to all manner of governing documents that kind of help move that forward in 2018. Fast forward. So I think it was the end of 2020 in December. There was one directive that sought to clarify roles of AFC relative to the other organizations in the Army's modernization and equipping enterprise. And that one was what we found. It had a couple of issues with it. The first and foremost, that in creating that linkage between AFC and other organizations, it really only focused on one part of the acquisition cycle. So, of course, when you start out from experimentation and concepts, it changes what you do and which organizations are involved as you go through the development phases, all the way through testing to when you field something, and then ultimately when you have to deal with the sustainment of it. So focusing on roles and relationships can't just look at the first end of the puzzle, right? Which is when you're early on experimenting. It's got to account for the entire life cycle of a weapon system. And then the second thing is when you're factoring in those relationships, you also have to look at making sure that you don't in any way subordinate one organization to another when it's not proper to do so, right? And so we saw that the language created some ambiguity regarding the statutory authorities of the acquisition executive that's codified under Goldwater-Nichols and Title 10 law. So that was a fairly recent directive that came out in December of 2020. And we just sought to undo that, to make sure that we could address those concerns and then re-clarify what's been working for a really long time, which is acquisition and modernization is truly a team sport. There are so many organizations involved, everything from the S&T community to our requirements community. As we continue to develop and buy, we need the expertise of our acquisition community. The testing community plays a critical role in making sure that our systems are safe and usable by our soldiers. And then our sustainers. We can't do anything without planning for that up front. And certainly that is, as many know, a lot of the cost goes post-fielding in the sustainment phase. So we just have to always make or take account, I think, of all of the different organizations' roles and make sure that we're reflecting that entire continuum of activity. So the directive that the Secretary signed out was just intended to clarify that piece of it and make sure that we are all on the same foot moving forward. And everything's working.
And the nomination for a new commander?
Yes, your question. So we fully expect AFC to continue to be a 4-star command. We anticipate that we will have a 4-star commander. It is just working its way through its process, but we look forward to having confirmed and nominated and confirmed 4-star general to lead and command AFC. It's a very critical part of what we do in modernization, and there's a lot of work that we still need to get done. So we're looking forward to working with someone in that role soon.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, I have a number of questions, but let's see if the audience has any, and if we can't pry any out, I can continue to ask. But I want to give time to you.
Morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Brigadier General Messina, Italian Army Attaché. As to the recruiting problem, have you ever considered the chance to build up or create a kind of a foreign legion like the French or the Spanish has in Europe in order to address this problem? Thank you very much.
Haven't specifically considered it that I'm aware of, but I think, certainly as we're looking at unique ways to kind of build connections to the population that currently isn't serving today and make them aware of what military service, what benefits there are, how to be a part of important missions that they certainly wouldn't get from any other career choices they might make. I think we've got to find better ways to do that. One of the things that we found in the near term is that we're having a really hard time this year in FY22, just competing in this labor market with some of the incentives that other non-military affiliated employers can provide. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that. So you're looking at, tuition assistance and tuition reimbursement programs, other kind of hiring and sign-on bonuses that the private sector can provide. I don't think we can win long-term by just looking at that end of this of the equation. I think we need to also be able to attract our eligible youth population based on what the Army can uniquely provide, which is an experience and an opportunity to serve as part of a really cohesive, effective team to tackle national problems that you don't get to do anywhere else in the world. And so I think we have continued to message that. But we've got to find, of course, better ways to do that, and it's got our top attention.
Baynard Defense Daily. Following up on the Futures Command piece, how are you in the Army kind of thinking about the long-term approach? In a perfect world, you execute on the 31+4 signature systems, the sort of things that CFTs will handle, post that process, in the kind of next phases of Futures Command in the 2030 and beyond. How are you starting to think about that? Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. It's good to see you again. I will say that Futures Command's role is varied. So their charter is not just to develop system requirements through the CFTs for select 31 or whatever the number is programs. I think what Futures Command holistically has to do is start out with operating concepts, looking at kind of experimentation. They oversee the S&T lab infrastructure that conducts a lot of that experimentation, and there is a lot of work that it needs to continue to be done over time to help us not only field the capabilities that are currently in development today, but to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve. The threats continue to evolve, technology continues to evolve. Our ability to maintain overmatch over near peer or potentially peer adversaries is something we are constantly looking at. So the real benefit, I think, of having Futures Command working on this problem is that they can integrate all of those inputs and make sure that on an ongoing basis, we're planning what we need to do over time. It's absolutely critical that we modernize the Army. As I think the chief has said multiple times, we are modernizing the Army in a way that hasn't been done in about 40 years. There is a lot of deferred kind of investment that we are now committed to, and that we're following through on replacing and upgrading some of our legacy platforms. But I think beyond that, I still think we need to think what is in the future, even post-fielding on the current set of programs that are in development. I think, and to your point, Matt, AFC is going to play a really key and critical role in helping us define our approach to that environment.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Good to see you. Thank you. Bob Schultz, KMW, Kraus-Maffei Wegmann. My issue goes to the modernization side, and I'd like to give two examples up front to show what my question entails. And I'm not trying to make you the commander of AFC, but I do think that there are policy issues that should emanate from the Army level to affect the things that I'm talking about. Number one is when we design systems, I'm not going to pick OMFE as an example, we focus on that particular vehicle, and we don't focus on how we're going to resupply that vehicle. If I gave you the example of an M109 PIM, an M992 CAT drives up, and literally soldiers take out individual 155 rounds and have to transload those into a vehicle. That's not very efficient on the future battlefield, and people are going to die. But in order to do some type of robotic or automated system, you need to design that into that combat vehicle before you even start. The analogy would be an infantryman who loads up his magazines with individual rounds, and when it's time to switch a magazine, you flip in a whole magazine with 30 rounds. So why not develop the system such that you can transload a full magazine of 15 rounds or 60 rounds, whatever that number is. So that's the first example. The second example was, lost my thought for a second. I'll let you answer that. Maybe I can come back just with a follow-up in just a second.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Bob. So I think on your first point, it's well taken. I think that's why I think our requirements have to be driven by the operational concepts and how the capabilities are employed. So much of that is what I think AFC really takes on, which is to do that experimentation, to be able to figure out how would we employ these systems that are in currently the earliest, I call it the primordial ooze phase, right? Where we're still developing requirements, we're still experimenting. I think we've got to work through some of those issues. The other thing I think we need to do is continue to push, as we've done on OMFE, which is make sure that we're embracing open architectures in our designs, which will enable us to do the plug and play of new technologies and new subsystems over time. Truly embracing, and not just talking about an architecture, but really embracing an open architecture approach is what gives us the opportunity to upgrade those platforms as we have done de facto. We just end up doing it in a very costly, very time-consuming and difficult way over time. We'd like to plan for it moving forward, and I think we're making taking some good steps in that direction.
So as you talked about open system architectures, it triggered the second point I wanted to make is if you look at, for instance, vibration in vehicles, if you look at airplanes, trains, buses, ships, cars, whatever, everyone tries to reduce vibrations because that reduces or it increases the life cycle, reduces the life cycle cost of all the parts, plus it makes the soldiers, when they arrive on the battlefield, more ready to fight. So you talk about an open system architecture, but if that architecture doesn't include some type of vibration reduction early on, when you build that hull, if you're using torsion bars instead of some other type of way to dampen the system, you're never going to get there, even with an open system architecture. You need early on some type of policy that says, hey, we need to look at these things before we start the design, so we include that. A company is not going to include that extra technology at extra cost when there's not a requirement for it. It's just more money with no value to the contracting officer.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think the other piece of that answer to your question is our embrace of digital engineering technology. So those capabilities will allow us to model, represent in a virtual environment the characteristics and performance of our platforms very early in the design phase. And I think those of you in industry understand that this is where everyone is going. This is where the Army is going, and we need to, and we're taking some leading steps, but I think we need to do even more. Because it will enable us to identify those trades, identify those shortfalls in the design very, very early on before you're bending metal and incurring the costs of building prototypes. So I'm very pleased to see that we're embracing that. I think OMFV and this current phase of doing the digital engineering with the 5 vendors is a good indicator of that. But to me, I'd like to say that 5 years from now, we look back and say, this was the knee in the curve where we started doing this more robustly in our development programs, because I think not only does it identify those critical trades, I think it also is a cost savings tool to make sure that we're investing our precious RDT&E dollars where they can be best utilized.
Hi, Ashley Roki with Janes.
Hi, Ashley.
Earlier this week, the U.S. Marine Corps Assistant Commandant was talking about sort of lessons learned from Ukraine and sort of reaffirming the need for the Marine Corps not to have a tank. How are sort of the lessons learned or thinking points right now early on from Ukraine sort of influencing how the Army is thinking about OMFV, mobile protective firepower, Abrams, and maybe some other technologies and I guess action items that you've sort of moved out on at this point? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So, first and foremost, our focus in terms of what we've been doing in response to the invasion has been supporting, obviously, the Ukrainians through the presidential drawdowns, and then, of course, making sure that we're providing support to the mission to bolster our allies and partners in Eastern Europe, as through NATO. So that's been our primary focus right now. But your question suggests, are there lessons to be learned from how the Russian army has performed that we might take into account as we're looking ahead to our own programs? Certainly, I think there's a lot of analysis to be done. I think there will be a lot of studies conducted in terms of not just the capabilities of Russian platforms, which I would not in any way equate to those that we field in the United States Army today. The Abrams tank is the best tank in the entire world, unparalleled. But I also think that we have to take into account as well the TTPs and other enablers as we look through what lessons learned there are, resupply lines and the ability to conduct logistics. I think there's a lot to be learned there, and we're just starting to unpackage that. The other thing I'd say is that you can't draw lessons to extrapolate for every mission set based on the experiences in one theater or in one particular environment. The Army has to be prepared to respond to whatever the nation's call is anywhere in the world at any moment in time. And so I think we have to be, make sure that we're prepared to do that and that we're aligned, to kind of what those requirements are that come to us from the Department of Defense.
Sir, good morning.
Good morning.
George Nicholson from the Global Special Operations Forces Foundation. She alluded to the event with General Smith 2 days ago. And when he talked about recruitment, he says the issue the Marines are looking at 3 phases. The issue of how do you recruit people, how do you train people, and how you retain people. And he says one of the Marine Corps' highest priority is how you retain people, how you change policies. Do you have to have a 20-year upward and out? But then he was asked the question about bonuses. And he says the Marines' position is we don't need bonuses. We have pride in the Marine Corps. If you have to use bonuses to keep people or to recruit people, we have a problem. And then last quick question, I was in a thing with Mike Esper last week, and you talked about logistics. And he said, one of the biggest problems we've got in the future is overall logistics, Transcom. Our adversaries realize how dependent we are on the Air Mobility Command, how dependent we are on the Military Sea Lift Command. If we can't get the stuff there, then what's going to happen to us? And our dependence upon space. They're going to know if they can take out those assets. And the Marine Corps basically saying, we've got to be prepared to operate in an environment where we're not going to have satellite access. Your comments.
Right. So let me take that 2-part question, which was a wonderful question. General Smith is wonderful, and I work with him quite a bit. To his point, I think there's just a difference in terms of numbers that the United States Marine Corps and the United States Army have to face. I received a fascinating statistic earlier this week that if you look at just the number of Category 1, highly qualified recruits, we have enough of those in the Army every year in our accessions mission that actually is more than the entire United States Marine Corps combined. So just that gives you a sense of scale of how much larger the Army is in the Marine Corps. Certainly, if we had a much smaller force with a different mission, I think we would be able to say, yes, we don't want to have to rely on any kind of incentives. We don't really need to change what we do. We just need to manage it as a retention issue. We simply, given our numbers, don't have that opportunity to do that. That being said, I agree that we've got to look at all three phases. How do we attract people? How do we actually bring them through the process? And then how do we retain them? What we're seeing in FY22 is that our ability to retain our talented soldiers is actually quite good. It's not like people are heading for the exits. I think the latest statistics show that we are projected to have about 103% of our current mission for retention of soldiers in FY22. So, the challenge that we see that we talked about, which is projected at the end of FY23, which is, over a year from now, would be based on the fact that we just can't bring them in right now. And we're projected not to bring them in the same volumes that we normally have and we're accustomed to doing year over year. So we know that that's the part of the ledger where we have the issue right now that we need to tackle. So let me switch now. So I think your other point about contested logistics is spot on. And this is what we are tackling as a Department of Defense and as part of the Joint Force. And the issue is one of the need for contested logistics, given the priority threat and what is the pacing threat really in the Indo-PACOM region. What you see there is the tyranny of geographic distance. It is very difficult to provide resupply to the Joint Force when you've got so much vast distance, and it's very difficult to get things there. There are a lot of things that as a department we are looking to do to help address that threat. I will say that the Army has been very active in all of it, to include kind of the development of a joint logistics campaign as part of the joint warfighting concept. We are very actively playing in all aspects of it. We know how to do pieces of this very, very well. We know in the Army, for example, how to establish pre-positioned stock at various points throughout the world and how to maintain it. And then also, we have a very good track record of understanding command and control in any operational environment, to include logistics. So I think as we continue to work on tackling that, you'll see the Army play a very significant role.
Sir, as you can see, we have a lot of great questions from the audience. We'll take two more and then we'll turn it back to General Haley.
Great.
Hey, good morning, sir. Jeremy Byram from Smartabase from Denver, Colorado.
Hi, Jeremy.
Quick question for you. Earlier, you referenced the health professionals that are integrated into the force and the focus to reduce and eliminate harmful behaviors. Can you describe how the Army is planning to leverage data to empower command teams to reduce and eliminate those harmful behaviors?
Absolutely. I think there is very much a data piece of this that will help us. I'll say first on the Army level, we have started out by first and foremost making sure that we give to commanders the right kind of access to the tools that they would need to be able to identify alarming trends, whether it's at the unit level or it's more broad to the installation or command level, where we've seen that there might be indicators of a problem, whether it's particular soldiers that might indicate that they have, for example, financial concerns or financial pressures. That's a warning light that indicates we need to make sure that we provide good support to that soldier, maybe provide them with additional support resources before it becomes a situation where a soldier begins to have different kinds of approaches to that problem that would be harmful. So I think there are ways to use tools to do that. But in addition, I think on top of that, there are ways to get the data in the first instance that we need to do fundamentally better. And so I'm very pleased, for example, in the Army that we've established what's called a fusion directorate. And this is the ability to co-locate a lot of the programs, resources that address all of these concerns from a prevention basis on an installation. How do we co-locate them and make sure that they are sharing data and information amongst each other, so that if a particular soldier or a family member on an installation approaches one program or one professional about one issue, they can redirect them and say, hey, I'm going to make sure that, if you need financial counseling because you're having a really hard time making ends meet, we're going to help you. If, for example, the issue is instead that one of your children at home needs better childcare and that's creating stress at home, we want to make sure that we want to alert you to all the resources available here on this installation to be able to address that gap or that requirement for childcare. And so these co-location efforts, these fusion cells, they've begun to be piloted at different installations in the Army. And I think we need to continue to see, and we're seeing great success from that, but how do we continue to scale that out to be able to address some of that? that will provide more data that will give even more ability to address and prevent some of these issues from happening on our installations. So well, I'm very pleased with where it's at, but there's a lot of work left to be done.
Sir, Doug Morrison, good morning. Appreciate your candid comments and your time. Kind of a two-part question on modernization. So you addressed earlier the end strength challenges, but part of the modernization aspect is long-range precision fires, for example, more MLRS firing units, longer range rockets, or integrated air and missile defense capabilities, division artillery, multi-domain task forces. Does that mean that potentially force structure changes, i.e. brigade combat teams being taken out of the force structure because we've got to fill these other capabilities? And then the second part of the question is the pace of modernization. We have units with M113s that are 60 years old, and yet the AMPV full rate production when it kicks in is maybe a brigade combat team a year, or OMFV first unit equipped 2029, but full operational capabilities not until the 2040s. How do we get after these capabilities that we need and the capacity to withstand potentially combat losses if what we're seeing is the threat in the 2028, 2030 time period? Thank you.
No, it's a great question. So let me tackle that first part first, because it's really important that I clarify that. So as we said when we released the FY23 budget, and I'll say again today, we do not see that there is a trade-off required between our continued emphasis on delivering our modernized programs and our ability to meet readiness and to take care of people and to meet the end strength that we're pursuing. So this is not at all budget related. It's, as I said earlier, entirely focused on the recruiting environment that all of the services in the department face. So to that end, we do not anticipate at this point making changes to force structure that are associated with that. What we continue to do is focus on the underlying issue, which is how do we recruit the soldiers that we need moving forward, and how do we tackle the problem to make sure that over many, many years we're able to take that on. To your second question regarding the pace of modernization, there are a lot of reasons why we can't simply buy everything out more quickly. And I know that because I've been on the other side of it, so I understand exactly how we would all like to see that for our respective programs that we're looking out for. And there's a myriad of reasons why we certainly can't. First and foremost, there are industrial-based limitations. There are, obviously, full production limitations in terms of how much output a particular production line can achieve. I think there are interdependencies in many of these programs at the subsystem level. So, even if, for example, you wanted to produce a platform, it needs an engine, or it needs a transmission, or it needs, a sensor that may require to become online at a different point in time. So we that's what the acquisition professionals do very well, is they calibrate the programs to be able to deliver in a logical way. And then the fielding of all of those capabilities has to be done in a deliberate, planned fashion to make sure that our units can be trained on how to use it, right? Everything from new equipment training to the ability to sustain and maintain those systems. So it's a very delicate balance and dance, if you will, about how we field. And I think the Army is expert at doing it, because you have to factor in all of these different pieces together to make it work. You can't just take one piece of that and kind of accelerate it or put it on steroids and have it work. So you got to balance all of that. And then of course there's a natural affordability constraint, right? I mean, I think every service in the Department of Defense would like to buy out all of its procurement quantities on an accelerated basis over 2 or 3 years, but simply the Department of Defense can't afford that. So we have to manage that level to make sure that we're looking at all the different portfolios. And I see a lot of my former colleagues like Bo Dias, who used to work in G8, that was their job, is making sure that they can balance that investment over time. So we do the best that we can, we adjust, but what I am pleased to say is that we are achieving kind of the goals we've set out for ourselves. We continue to make really, really good progress on the development side so that we have the options to field all of these capabilities as they come online over the next few years.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Undersecretary, for a great, candid discussion. You're always welcome here. Please let us know how AUSA can help you and the Army senior leadership get its message out. as it's our mission here to educate, inform, and connect. So let's give the Undersecretary a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So before we close, I wanted to inform you of a few upcoming events. We hope you all can come down to Fayetteville, North Carolina next week to help AUSA launch the brand new Warfighter Summit and Exposition outside of Fort Bragg at the Crown Complex. Our next coffee series features Lieutenant General Jody Daniels, the Chief of the Army Reserve, and that'll be here on 3 August. Our next subject in our Hot Topic series is aviation. These hot topics are day-long deep dives with subject matter experts and Army leaders, industry leaders, and they're incredibly informative. So the aviation hot topic will take place here on the 25th of August. And of course, mark your calendars, the AUSA's annual meeting, 10 to 12 October at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center here in Washington. So for more information on these or to register, please visit our website at ausa.org. And finally, we want to thank all of you that support us with your membership. Your membership matters. You help us support the Army. So thanks again for attending and have a great Army Day. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack.